Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves postcast. We are live following the Timberwolves' fifth consecutive victory, a win over Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs. Jack Borman of Canis Hoopus joins me as we break down the victory on the postcast.
You are Locked On Wolves postcast, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota, your team every day.
To the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome to the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel as well. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm filling in for Luke Inman hosting today on the postcast, and I'm joined by Jack Borman, the editor of Canis Hoopus. Jack, good to see you. Appreciate you joining. Let's talk Wolves, Spurs. And this was, I would say this is kind of a weird one. It was all over the place. There's lots of places we could start. Rough start to the game for the Wolves. There were turnover issues, urgency issues, we could call it. And then they pulled it together middle stages, and then it still got somewhat dicey towards the end of the game. What are your initial takeaways from this one?
Yeah, I mean, I thought we were going to have to pull a fire alarm or something when Mike Conley had two turnovers in that first quarter and had one the whole entire season and I think it was on the first possession of the entire season, which I think was just kind of exemplary of how the Timberwolves played, and that I think that they were kind of out of rhythm and out of sync early. They were 1 of 7 from three, especially coming out, after a couple of really good 3-point shooting performances. That's obviously, not what you want. And then when you turn it over 7 times and give up, I think either 8 or 9 points off of turnovers for a San Antonio Spurs team that has really struggled in the half court, you obviously can't be too pleased about it. But, I think the biggest difference between the Timberwolves this year and the Timberwolves last year is that when they'd have quarters like that, or they'd come out in the first quarter like that, they often found themselves down, 10, 12, 15 points. And they were still only down 5 points after one quarter, which obviously was huge for them and kind of allowed them to settle into the game and kind of grind down the Spurs starting in that second quarter. And I think, the way they were able to turn around that zone defense had a lot to do with it after, not using it all that effectively in the first quarter there.
Yeah, I agree with the first point you made 100%. I mean, we've seen the Timberwolves get off to rough starts against inferior teams, and the Spurs are, I think, better than your average inferior team just because of, obviously, Victor Wembanyama and how they've got a lot of talent on that team, even if they haven't played very well overall so far this season. But yet the Wolves still, as you said, found themselves only down a handful of points. They actually, I think, were tied at halftime or maybe up by a point or two. And they really had no business based on how badly they played to start the game. I think they had 6 or 7 first quarter turnovers. And the Spurs were making tough shots. Like there were a couple early in the game where the Wolves had solid contests, a couple of mid-range jumpers, a couple of threes, and the Spurs still made shots, which of course they were like, I think the 23rd best offense in terms of offensive rating coming into the game, the Spurs were. So there was some weirdness too. And yet the Wolves were still able to kind of hang with things, and it didn't quite feel like same old like we got used to seeing last year. You mentioned the zone. I want to talk a little bit about that. The Wolves have hardly played any zone and didn't really do it much last year either. They started mixing it in this game, and it worked really well. Obviously, the Spurs are not a very good shooting team. They wanted to try and make the Spurs take some of those outside shots instead of working it around. And the Wolves, just the perimeter defense was not as on point when they weren't in zone in this game. What are your thoughts on the Wolves? This feels like the right opponent to play the zone against. I don't know that we're going to see it very often, but what were your thoughts in general on the Wolves, on Chris Finch, pulling that lever, and then also the results from it?
Yeah, I'm certainly not surprised, just because obviously, you want to have a lot of guys that are near and in and around the paint. If Wembanyama is able to catch the ball in the middle of the floor, just so you have bodies to show on him, which I think is an important thing too. But, because the Wolves haven't played, zone that much this year, it's hard to get those live rebounding reps in a zone defense. And that was something that they struggled with initially and then really cleaned it up in the second and third quarters. But, I said this earlier that, or tweeted it earlier that I think, Chris Finch was kind of just daring a really young and inexperienced team to take a bunch of, contested early in the shot clock 3-pointers to try to slow down some of the ball movement that the Spurs were able to get going in the, the early parts of that first and second quarter. And that's exactly what happened. The Wolves were really able to kind of take control of this game because, San Antonio just continued in that third quarter to jack up Jakob, whether it was like long contested twos in the short corner or pulling up threes. I think they were 1 of 10 from 3 in that third quarter. Pretty much all because of that zone. And, guys are taking shots 2, 3, 4 feet behind the 3-point line, which is exactly what you want. And then the Wolves were able to get some runouts as a result of that, which was, really important to them building that. I think the lead got as high as like 17, 18, it looks like, in that third quarter, which was, built off the back of that zone defense for sure.
Yeah, and the Wolves, as we said, it was sloppy early on. Turnovers were an issue. They went to the zone kind of second quarter, got themselves back in the game, briefly took a lead towards the end of the second quarter. And it was there was a moment kind of like, I think the Wolves were within a possession or two. And, I've just been so fascinated with Chris Finch's, the big man rotation so far this season through, 7 games or 8 games, has been fascinating. And in this game, the Wolves decided, and Wembanyama wasn't on the floor in this moment, obviously, but the Wolves decided to just go with Naz at the 5, which we haven't seen a ton of this year. Usually it's staggering Rudy and Cat, and it was only for a few minutes, but I thought it worked nicely. Finch was kind of searching for the right combo. And the Wolves closed the first half really well. And then in the third quarter, we really saw Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns both get going. There were some nice moments from Jaden McDaniels as well. I think they ended up being up 15 for the quarter, and as you said, built a lead as high as 17 or 18. But it almost took, there were some good ant moments in the second quarter too. He started to play much better, but it really took it was like the middle 2 quarters where things finally clicked offensively. And the Spurs came into this game as the league's worst defense. They'd given up at least 120 points to every opponent except for one so far this season. The Wolves were the second, and they still scored 117. But it really took a minute for the Wolves to click offensively in this game.
Yeah, it did. I mean, obviously the turnovers had a huge, part to play in that. And the good thing was that the Timberwolves didn't turn the ball over in the first, I want to say 4.5, 5 minutes of that second quarter, which kind of allowed them to at least, get in and run some offense and get some guys some clean looks and at least get some shots up that they weren't getting up. When you're turning the ball over, it's, not allowing opportunities for, your stars to at least get shots up or see the ball go through the basket. And, especially for a guy like Ant, who, really just did not have any energy at all in that first quarter. To see him knock down a couple of those threes, he made that crazy layup to get under and around a contest from Wembanyama and pick and roll with Gobert there. That was really important for them. And they rebounded too from a couple of bad turnovers from Shake Milton early in that second quarter. And I just thought that, the way that the Timberwolves really, were just patient offensively. I don't think that they were rushed, and I think. They kind of just trusted, hey, if we play our game, if we can get this into the half court, slow it down, run a bunch of screen and roll actions, get off the ball early in the shot clock and kind of get the ball moving a little bit around the perimeter. That's how they're able to get back into the game. And then, like you said, they're still able to build a little lead there by the break that, they really just kind of blew open with the help of Jaden McDaniels there early in the third quarter, playing some really nice defense that resulted in some easy points on the other end, which was, I think, really important for kind of opening the floodgates offensively.
Yeah, and the Wolves were up 17 going to the fourth quarter, and it really kind of felt like, made sense to feel like the Wolves were in a pretty good spot, and then things disintegrated. I don't say disintegrated. I think it got down to 6 points was the closest it got. And of course it meant that Finch had to play, rotation guys the rest of the game, really starters the rest of the game. To me, I don't know that it was anything in particular. There were a couple of bad decisions. It was kind of like it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion for a few possessions there, where even like Kyle Anderson had a rough game turnover wise. There were just some bad decisions, but then also some fluky stuff. The Spurs hit some shots that they hadn't been making. And suddenly it was like a 3 possession game, and the Wolves had to take timeouts and things really slowed down. Was there anything that stuck out to you late in the game? There was also a couple uncharacteristic. You mentioned the Conley turnovers early. He had that weird travel, and then there was, I think, maybe one other turnover from Conley late. Was there anything that stuck out to you during this kind of like backslide in the fourth quarter, or was it just kind of like, hey, the NBA's full of good players and good teams, and the Wolves just it's never really all that easy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially, the Spurs shooting 1 of 10 from 3 in the third quarter, and then, came out and they shot 5 of 8 in the fourth quarter to balance things out. So that was obviously a big thing. But Tre Jones was tremendous in this fourth quarter stretch that they had here. If you look at lineups when he's been playing point guard and Sohan has been off the floor and when Wembanyama has been out there, Those lineups have been incredible for San Antonio, and Trey Jones does an awesome job of making everything tough for, a guard or a ball handler in the half court on the defensive end of the floor. And then, whenever the Spurs get a stop and he has the ball in his hands, he's just a runaway freight train in transition, in the sense that he, just creates so much pace, kind of like Jordan McLaughlin does for the Wolves. Very similar type of player in transition, where, he just gets going and everybody runs with him. And it's just like, these 4 or 5 players coming at you all at once, all because of, the pace and the speed that he can kind of play with in transition. And that's how, Wemby got going a little bit there too, got some easy buckets in transition. And then you add in a couple of threes from Devin Vassell. And the Timberwolves just frankly had some really dumb offensive possessions where they just threw some pretty careless passes, weren't really working the ball to try to get, any of their best players the ball in spots that they feel comfortable scoring in. And I think even after a timeout from Finch, you saw a turnover from Kyle Anderson, which isn't what you need, especially if, Finch is going to burn a timeout. A lot of fans want to say, well, hey, where's the Finch timeout? And there it was. But, the players also have to follow through and make good on that and kind of recollect their heads a little bit. And that just didn't happen. But like you said, it got down as close as 6, but, this is what good teams do, right? They're able to, they're able to kind of collect themselves. And, I thought Rudy Gobert was a really important piece of that, and that his activity on the offensive glass created, 3 or 4 extra shots for the Timberwolves throughout that fourth quarter. That was really important in kind of, stemming the tide and swinging some momentum back the Timberwolves way to eventually kind of, help them get to the finish line there.
Let's talk about our friends over at PrizePicks, presenting partners of today's show. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you could take LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5-point combo of 3-pointers made and receptions, or you could also go with a Minnesota theme there and, I don't know, take Alexander Madison over on yards and Karl-Anthony Towns, more than on 3-pointers made. If you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Jack, let's talk a little bit about some of the bench players. And this was another, I thought, a very strong Nickeil Alexander-Walker game. And he had a rough start to the season. Rough's maybe strong, kind of a nondescript start to the season. The last couple of games, I want to say he had, I think it was 8 assists on Wednesday, if I remember right.
Correct.
Yeah, 8 assists and 0 or 1 turnovers. In this game, he had 4 assists, no turnovers. He also made his first 3 shots from the field, hit a 3-pointer at a key point, I think, in the third quarter. Or second quarter, I guess, so the Wolves were still trying to draw even. Just a well-rounded performance for Alexander Walker.
Yeah, I think, we're seeing a lot of what we saw from him in that playoff series against Denver, where, a lot of his offense was very much within the flow of the offense and very much, within what he's capable of doing. And the biggest thing for him was he was playing really confidently offensively, down the stretch of last season. I mean, how couldn't you with the way he was playing and how big of a role he had on this team? And I think, shifting back to the bench a little bit and not being able to find his 3-point shot in the preseason, I think kind of carried over into the first part of this season and just wasn't playing with the same confidence, was really hesitant, playing off the catch, wasn't really sure whether he should shoot open shots or, take dribbles in and was just kind of, slowing things down and wasn't making quick decisions. But now we're seeing that from him. And, the kind of the pressure releasing moments that he has as a scorer are really important, whether it's a spot up 3 or a nice little drive, because he can get all the way to the rack. And we've seen he's got a 7-foot wingspan almost and really uses that to his advantage. And he's ambidextrous too as a finisher, which is great. So those two things are kind of a big combination from him. And Yeah, I mean, what more can you say? I mean, his defense is always going to be there, and that's the great thing about him. And then we was able to add that kind of complementary offense that you see in a game like this. You may not look at the box score and think, oh my gosh, like that just jumped off the page, but just such a steadying, bench guy tonight, and that's exactly what you need from a Timberwolves team that, is going to have different guys step up based on matchups. And tonight was one of those nights where. He was really able to take advantage of some smaller guards that played for San Antonio, and like you said, a great time for him to stack two performances together here and keep it rolling.
Yeah, the bench as a whole in this game, was a little bit up and down. I mentioned Kyle Anderson had some turnover problems early. It wasn't his best game, although he had some nice moments in the center of the Spurs zone. Nas got banged up towards I think it was end of the third quarter, maybe, or it was fourth quarter, I guess. And he was a bit uneven prior to that. Shake Milton also up and down. It's just kind of been like, this was one of those games where you really wanted the bench to distance themselves because, almost by definition, a team like the Wolves that's expecting to be a top 4 or 5 seed in the West at worst should be deeper, and you should have an advantage when you get deep into a bench. And in this game, I thought it was a little bit uneven in general. We still haven't seen that full Shake Milton like lift off, although he played a much stronger game earlier this week. But in general, this is still one of those things to like kind of see how Finch mixes and matches. And, we definitely could talk more about Cat and Ant. Nobody else on this team besides the Timberwolves' 2 superstars scored more than 11 points. This was just a Cat and Ant offensive performance, a pretty decent at times defensive performance as a team. But the bench, I thought like the Wolves just need to get a little bit more consistency out of their bench. And part of it, of course, is still figuring out exactly what their rotation looks like moving forward. And a little bit's going to be matchup dependent, night to night, as you said. But, still kind of waiting for Shake Milton, and, Kyle Anderson is usually a little bit steadier than I think he's been so far to kind of hit their strides.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it with the consistency piece, and something that Chris Finch said after the team's, or was it was either before or after the game on Wednesday. Chris Finch said that they're kind of learning more and more about Shake, and learning that, he's kind of a guy that is able to kind of get into the game a little bit easier when he's playing off the ball. And we've seen Nikhil, like you said, really take that step forward playing on the ball in that backup point guard role. So hopefully now that those two guys are in roles that are a little bit better suited for them when they share the floor together, will kind of help one another get going. And I mean, the other thing with Shake Milton that I think some people have to, keep in mind too last year is that he played a lot of games that, James Harden either missed, and he was, certainly more than capable of scoring. He had 6 games of 20 points or more last season. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Like, the offense for him will come. But yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying about just the consistency and needing more from these guys. I think that, obviously that's what Karl and Ant are paid to do. They're paid to go out and get 25, 30 points every single night. But, I think that it's a good thing for those two guys that they're able to have a game like this and be able to, prove that they're able to step up. Because, again, a night like this last season, the Wolves just wouldn't have won because Ant wouldn't have had enough scoring help. And that's, I think, where we're getting Karl back is obviously huge, is that, there were plenty of nights last year where begging for a 20 or 25 point guy that Ant could play with. Now he has it. And I think that those two guys did a really good job of kind of, taking the reins of the offense when the other one was off the floor, which was really important. I think Karl had 13 in the third quarter, which really, kind of helped that half court offense find rhythm. And, and obviously when Karl's able to shoot the ball, like he did tonight from 3 of 7, you'll take that every single time. So, but yeah, I loved what we saw from Cat and Ant. If you got more on that.
Let's talk about that next. Let's talk about our friends at Jace Medical. Whether you're on extended travel, bracing for a major weather event, or limited by yet another supply shortage, you're covered thanks to our partners at Jace Medical. Life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications can be ordered in a 1-year supply, even ED generics for Cialis, Viagra, and Revatio prescriptions. You can go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply and your daily medication. Remember, you can use the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount as well. Again, that's jacemedical.com. You can use the promo code LOCKEDON for your 12-month supply. You'll get $20 off your purchase at jacemedical.com. Let's talk about Cat and Ant. those guys both played really well in this game, primarily on offensively, and had some good defensive moments per usual. It took Ant until the second quarter to really get going, and it was really kind of late in the second quarter, and then he played really well. Let's start with him. I mean, he had 28 points, 9 of 21 shooting, decently efficient because he got to the line 11 times. We are seeing his 3-point percentage come back down to earth. He was, I think, 2 of 8 Wednesday, or 2 of 7. He was 2 of 8 again tonight. 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 turnovers for Ant. He easily could have gotten the line 2 or 3 more times in this game. I like the way he attacked the basket in general. He also, the 5 assists, he turned it over 4 times, but I think there were at least 2, if not 3 assists to Rudy in the 2-man game. And that's something that we saw in preseason. We saw the first couple games this year. We're just kind of seeing these flashes of like, hey, if this is like Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert on steroids because of what Ant's ceiling really is, and the fact that he's just a better shooter, and much bigger and on down the list, this could be really crazy because Rudy looks every bit like Rudy from 3 years ago at the moment. So Ant in general, even though the turnovers weren't great, and even though the 3-point shooting wasn't great, I thought the shot selection was good. The overall decision making was fairly sound in this game for Ant.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing from Ant is I want to say Ant shooting damn near 50% in that long 2, mid-range area from the free throw line, to the 3-point line, and he was 4 for 6 in that range tonight. And I think the more that he's able to kind of take advantage of that, bully that drop defense where a big is down low in the paint, he's able to just rise up and knock down open and rhythm jumpers. The more that that dropping big is going to have to play up, and then Ant's going to be able to kind of hesitate a little bit and get into that jump pass to hit Gobert right in the middle of the lane, which we saw a couple of times tonight for buckets. And that's again, a huge reason why coming into this season, everyone was kind of hoping that the next step for Ant would be to develop a more sound and consistent mid-range game. And, I think throughout this season, seemingly on a game-by-game, almost linear progression, we've seen Ant's decision-making in terms of where to shoot and where to drive and when to kick has just gotten so much better, especially in the mid-range area. He's seemingly taking less dumb 2s every single game, which is important. And honestly, like if he turns it over an extra, 1 or 2 times because he's, really trying to find Gobert inside, like I would totally live with that, as opposed to, he comes around the screen and kind of does the thing where he snakes and gets the defender on his back and then takes, this little step back 2 with a hand in his face. We saw that earlier in the season. He's kind of getting rid of that a little bit. So yeah, I think you'll take a game like tonight from Ant every single time. I like the kind of the mix that he's got going where, he took 8 shots from 3, 13 from 2. I think that's about right. Getting him above 20 shots a game is probably what you want for a high volume scorer like him. So yeah, really hard to poke holes in what, he was able to do tonight offensively.
Right. And to your breakdown of 3s versus 2s is perfect because you'd take an extra 1 or even 2 turnovers a game if he's eliminating, 6 long 2s from his game, because he's going to get to line more if he gets the basket more. He's not going to shoot 25% from 3 consecutive games very often, right? Like he's a good shooter. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to lay it out. Like you can live with the turnovers. I mean, great players turn the ball over, right? You just rather see him take good shots because he's so good and so effective when he gets into the paint and shooting from outside the arc. And the shot selection really genuinely matters. Karl-Anthony Towns, for most of the game, really kind of carried the Wolves offensively. And it wasn't really pretty. Like it still was like, you look at his line, and I actually think his line looked better than I felt like he was playing partway through the game. Like there were moments where it just kind of felt like you were waiting for the offensive foul. There eventually was one, which actually, by the way, I thought was a bad call. I don't think it was an offensive foul, but he could have been called a couple times earlier than that. He got into it, Zach Collins a bit in the middle of the game. But I mean, so did Rudy, so did everybody. There was like, it just kind of felt like Cat was teetering on the edge of that, the stray voltage thing that everybody talks about with Karl-Anthony Towns, but he never went full stray voltage Cat, right? Like he just kind of teetered there. He was really effective. He was relatively efficient. I thought he should have attempted more than 4 free throws in this game. 29 and 12. Great to see him so active on the glass, especially early in this game when you alluded to this earlier. They were struggling to rebound out of the zone. And the Spurs just also have a really long team. So it was very important that Cat got on the glass. This was, in general, given the circumstances, even though it wasn't pretty, I thought it was one of Cat's best 1 or 2 games so far this season, and mostly what you'd expect or want to see from him on a nightly basis.
Yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, the biggest thing for me right now with Karl is free throws, right? You look at, each of the last, in 4 of the last, 6 seasons now, he's shot 5.8 free throws or more per game. And, last year was at 4.7 and this year is down to 3.1 right now. And, I think part of that is just because some of these fouls that could go the other way have been called offensive fouls. I think Finch did a good job the other night pointing out that, a lot of times there's contact before he hooks that kind of, prompts Cat to hook, that I think that, the Timberwolves have probably been in contact with the league office about. But, I think the biggest thing for Karl is just doing things quickly. And I think tonight, for the most part, you saw him do things pretty quickly, whether it was, step into a nice in rhythm 3-pointer on a catch and shoot spot, or deciding to just go. I think, the more that he catches the ball and holds onto it and is, fake surveying the defense, and kind of sizing someone up, the quicker he goes, the better he is. And I thought we saw a lot of that tonight, which was, obviously important. And then the other thing was Karl was able to score at all 3 levels of the defense. Right. And so, for him, I think the biggest thing is just finding, really easy, repeatable ways to score. And the first most obvious way is catch and shoot 3-pointers. But outside of that, we haven't really seen any type of, easy offense for him that he's been able to repeat so far this season. And whether that's, being able to successfully post up, we saw a little bit of that right away in the preseason, that hasn't necessarily translated. I think now it's, beyond your 3-point game. What are you going to be able to add? And certainly the hope is that driving game will come more when Towns is playing the 5 and Gobert is out, especially if he's going to be able to play next to Naz Reid and Kyle Anderson. So, it'll be an interesting one to develop, but obviously, great for Karl that he was able to score 29 points tonight with only making 4 free throws. So they'll need every bit of scoring they can get out of him, just so that Ant isn't having to carry this huge load on a nightly basis.
Yeah, and also only committing 1 foul himself was great to see, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the making quick decisions, just being decisive, right? Like, remember Ant saying that about Karl-Anthony Towns. It was either last year, it might have been the year before last year. He said that in an interview, like basically, hey, we just need him to do something quicker, right? When he gets the ball, they used to do the mid-post thing a lot with him, and almost like how Denver uses Jokic, and sometimes Cat would get in these funks where he would get tunnel vision and he'd be looking for the pass or whatever. Somebody comes up, strips the ball, or he just decides, hey, I'm going to take on this triple team. And just being on the perimeter more and being decisive, that then allows him to score at all 3 levels and then distribute off of that, right? Like using the 3 to set up the drive, using the drive to set up the 3, using them both to set up the pass, because we know Cat can be a good passer when he's not overthinking things. And this was a pretty good all-around example, I think, when it comes to Karl-Anthony Towns. We're about done, and we haven't even talked about this being the first game of the in-season tournament. Any hot takes on that? Anything you want to say about the Wolves being 1-0 in the tournament?
No, I mean, I looked at, I wrote something for Canis yesterday on Thursday, just kind of explaining what the in-season tournament is, partly for myself because I needed to refresh up on it. But I think the Timberwolves in-season tournament fate could honestly be, sealed on Tuesday, right? So they play Golden State on Sunday, and that is not an in-season tournament game. And then they'll rematch Golden State again in San Francisco on Tuesday, but that will be an in-season tournament game. And so the Timberwolves and the Warriors are currently tied atop the Group C table there at 1-0. And so the winner of that game certainly will be in the driver's seat for for the rest of the group play stage. And also important to consider right now that the Kings are without De'Aaron Fox still, which is, obviously a big thing for them, considering, how important he is to their offense and considering that they don't really have a defense. They can kind of step up in the wake of, losing one of the best offensive players in the league. So, big game for the Timberwolves. We saw the Warriors play the Thunder last Friday. And Draymond Green and Steph Curry both spoke glowingly of the in-season tournament and how that there was, a palpable increased energy in the building and from the other players. And so the Warriors are going to be ready to play in that one. And, it will be a fun game because there's some increased stakes, and it will be the second game of a little 2-game set. So it'll be a fun chess match. But on the in-season tournament as a whole, like the goal is to make these games, 1 or 2% more entertaining at minimum than, what a standard November game would have been. And I certainly think that we're seeing that so far when you just look across the board at how few blowouts there have been in these in-season tournament games relative to some other regular season games, whether there's, some truth, whether there's going to be some, sample size that bears that out, or it's just, 2 days or 3 days of those games. We don't know yet, but it's been a fun concept so far. And I think it's kind of hard to, really just bang on the table one way or the other about whether it's been a success or a failure at this point.
Yeah. If nothing else, it gives another thing to talk about. It's a more, the courts are fun. They're exciting. Most of them are ugly, but some are good. So that's fun too. Of course, we go live on the postcast after every single Wolves game, typically hosted by Luke Inman over at Locked On Sports Minnesota, and then either Jack or Tyler Metcalf from Canis Hoopus are the guests on the show. So live on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube page after every single show. You can also get the audio after the fact. If you joined us late, you can get the audio on the Locked On Wolves audio feed a little bit later here tonight. So check that out this weekend and get yourself ready for Sunday in Golden State. As Jack mentioned, big thank you for watching. A big thank you for listening to the show. Make sure to go follow Jack on Twitter. You can see our Twitter handles there on the screen, and follow Locked On Wolves and Locked On Sports Minnesota on all platforms. A big thank you once again for watching and for listening, and we'll catch you next time.